The yell echoed in the hallway and nailed me to the cold tiles, as if I were a criminal caught in the act, with my heart galloping in my old chest. I am Frances. I am 68 years old, and I have fed half the neighborhood with my hands, but here I seem to be in the way. My son-in-law thinks I am a stinking burden, but he forgot to read the name on the deed to this house. I have always been a light sleeper, the kind of woman who wakes up when the wind shifts or when a cat meows 3 streets over. Occupational hazard, I suppose. I spent 40 years running the kitchen at the Copper Pot, my little diner downtown. In that place, if you fell asleep, your rice burned or the delivery guys robbed you blind. I learned to stay alert, to be efficient, to never let a single thing slip past me. But old age is treacherous. It strips you of the confidence in your own body little by little, like the ocean eating away at the sand on the beach without you noticing, right up until there is nowhere left to put your towel. That night, my stomach played a cruel trick on me. Maybe it was the chili from dinner, or maybe my guts just don't have the patience they used to. I got up with that dull, urgent ache that us old folks know all too well, dragging my slippers down the hallway so I wouldn't make a sound. I tried to be as stealthy as a ghost in my own house, and I say my own house with absolute intention, even if sometimes by the way they look at me, it feels like I am an unwanted guest who has overstayed her welcome. The bathroom in this condo has terrible acoustics, and the old pipes groan. I did what I had to do, battling the quiet shame that my body no longer runs like a Swiss watch. I flushed the toilet, or at least I tried to. The handle was loose, a quick fix that Robert, my son-in-law, had promised to take care of 3 weeks ago and, of course, never did. The water went down timidly, lacking any real force, leaving behind the evidence of my midnight urgency. That was exactly when the hallway light flicked on, blinding me completely. Robert was standing there in his doorway, eyes swollen with sleep and a look of pure disgust on his face that broke my soul worse than a physical blow. He didn't have a shirt on, and his crossed arms formed an impenetrable wall between his arrogant youth and my vulnerable old age. "For God's sake, Frances," he roared, completely uncaring that it was 3 a.m. "Useless old woman. You don't even know how to use the toilet. The whole house stinks." His words weren't just sound, they were whip cracks. I froze, my hand still resting on the defective metal handle, trembling not from the cold, but from a hot, suffocating humiliation creeping up my neck. The smell, admittedly, wasn't a bed of roses, but it was the smell of humanity, of sickness, of getting old. "Robert, the handle," I tried to explain, my voice cracking, feeling tiny, microscopic, like a little girl getting scolded. "Excuses," he cut me off, pinching his nose with a theatrical flair that hurt me far worse than the actual insult. "You always have an excuse. You smell like a corpse, Frances, like pure rot. Shut that door and spray some air freshener. I have to work tomorrow, and you don't let anyone sleep with your filth." He slammed his door so hard the pictures vibrated against the drywall. Those pictures I bought. Those walls I painted. I stood alone in the harsh bathroom light, staring at myself in the toothpaste-splattered mirror they never bothered to clean. The woman looking back at me had messy gray hair and watery eyes. But beneath that layer of sorrow, I saw something else. I saw the Frances who built a business out of thin air when her husband died. I saw the woman who paid for her daughter Lucy's college tuition by selling thousands of meat pies and stews. Useless old woman, he had called me. Stinks. I cleaned the bathroom. I cleaned it with a silent, blinding fury. At 3:30 in the morning, I poured bleach. I scrubbed the porcelain until my knuckles turned dead white. I sprayed that cheap lavender aerosol until the air became a choking hazard of chemical. Perfume. I didn't do it for him. I did it because I am not a filthy person. I am a decent woman. I went back to my room, but sleep had already slipped out the window. I sat on the edge of my bed, running my fingers over the cotton sheets I brought from my old house. My room is small, the smallest in the condo, because when I moved in 2 years ago, I insisted they take the master suite. "So you have your space," I had told them. What a fool I was. See, my daughter never came out of her room during the screaming. I know she heard it. She is a light sleeper, just like me. Her silence was 1,000 times worse than Robert's yelling. Her silence was the ultimate confirmation that she, too, in some dark corner of her mind, thought the exact same thing, that I am a burden, that I smell bad, that I'm in the way. I waited for the sun to come up. I listened to the sounds of the city waking up, the garbage truck, the early buses, the distant whistle of the manufacturing plants. Every sound reminded me that the world kept right on spinning, entirely indifferent to my pain. But I am not the kind of woman who sits around licking her wounds. My father always used to say, if you fall down, you get up and check what you still have in your pockets. At 7 in the morning, I walked out to the kitchen. I brewed coffee, just like I do every single day. The aroma of the fresh dark roast, strong and bitter, started a war against the smell of chemical lavender creeping from the hallway. I set the table. Robert came out first, dressed in his cheap suit and a tie he never quite knows how to match properly. He walked right past me without making eye contact, went straight for the coffee maker, poured himself a mug, and drank it standing up while scrolling on his phone. Not a good morning, not an apology, nothing. To him, I was just another piece of furniture, one that occasionally smelled bad and had to be tolerated. Then Lucy walked out. She did look at me, but it was an evasive, guilty glance. "Mom," she started, her voice soft and fragile. "Sit down and eat your breakfast, honey." I told her, my tone so flat it even surprised me. There was no warmth in it, just sheer habit. "Robert was really exhausted last night," she whispered, nervously scraping butter across a piece of toast. "You know how he gets when he gets woken up. Don't pay attention to him." "I don't," I replied, turning my back to her to wash a spoon that was already perfectly clean. "Eat up, you're going to be late." Robert snorted from the living room, digging around for his keys. "Tell her to shut the door tight next time." "Seriously, Lucy, it's unbearable. It feels like we are living in a nursing home." Lucy didn't defend him, but she didn't defend me either. She just lowered her head and took a bite of her toast. Right then and there, something snapped inside of me. It wasn't a bone, and it wasn't an artery. It was the very last thread of hope I was hanging on to, that this was a real family. I looked around the condo. The solid oak table they were eating on was mine, handed down from my grandmother. The Italian leather sofa where Robert propped up his dirty shoes was mine, bought with the profits from my best year at the diner. The double-door refrigerator, the microwave, the washer, the 60-inch flat-screen television. Every piece of it was mine. When I sold my big house and the restaurant so I could finally rest, I used that money to buy this condo. I put it in my name, thank God, mostly due to the nagging of my real estate lawyer, an old friend who didn't put much stock in modern sons-in-law. But I let them believe they were doing me a massive favor by taking me in and caring for me. I let them live here without paying a dime in rent, just splitting the utility bills so they could build up their savings and buy their own place someday. But in 2 years, they haven't saved a single dollar. They took vacations, they ate at fancy restaurants, they bought designer clothes, and I am the useless old woman. "We are leaving," Robert called out from the front door, not even bothering to look my way. "Lucy, hurry up." "Bye, Mom. See you tonight," my daughter said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek, a dry, obligatory kiss. "Have a good day," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I wanted them to have a great day, as far away from me as humanly possible. The door shut with the heavy metallic click of the deadbolt. Silence flooded the apartment once again, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt thick with possibilities. I walked over to the window and watched them walk out of the building. Robert was speed walking, glued to his phone screen, and Lucy was trotting right behind him, struggling to keep up with his pace. They got into their car, a late-model sedan they financed 3 months ago because the old one just didn't have enough style. I let out a breath and turned around. I walked right to the center of the living room and stood there, feeling the weight of the space. "Useless old woman," I repeated under my breath, testing the flavor of the words on my tongue. They tasted like ash, but they also tasted like gasoline. I walked into my bedroom and pulled open the drawer of my nightstand. Right there, tucked under my rosaries and my blood pressure medication, was my old leather-bound contact book, the one from the copper pot. I flipped through the yellowed pages with fingers that were wrinkled but entirely steady. I went straight to the M section. Market. Mario the mechanic. Movers. Arthur's Moving Company. Old man Arthur, the owner, had been a regular of mine for 20 years. A man of his word, the kind they just don't make anymore. He always said my meatloaf gave his boys the brute strength they needed to haul pianos up flights of stairs. I dialed his number on my cell phone. My pulse wasn't racing. In fact, I felt calmer than I had in years. Yeah, a gruff voice answered on the third ring. Arthur, it's Francis. From the copper pot. There was a brief pause, followed by a warm, booming laugh on the other end of the line. Francis, what a miracle! How is the best cook in the city doing? We haven't heard from you in ages. I am fine, Arthur. Or rather, I am going to be fine. I need a favor. Whatever you need, Francis. What are we moving? I looked around the room. I looked at the leather sofa. I looked at the oak dining table. I looked at the silk drapes. I looked toward the kitchen, where my stainless steel appliances gleamed. Everything, Arthur, I said. My voice did serious. I need the biggest truck you have in the lot, and I need it right now. I am emptying out the apartment. Right now? He asked, clearly caught off guard. Is it an emergency? Let's just say yes. A sanitary emergency, I replied, a dark, ironic smile creeping onto my lips. Apparently, there is a bad smell in the house, and I need to take everything out so it can ventilate properly. Do you understand? We will be there in 40 minutes with a full crew. Where are we taking the haul? To the storage facility you guys own down south. I will be checking into a hotel for a few days. Done deal. 40 minutes. Start packing up the fragile stuff. I hung up the phone and felt a massive wave of adrenaline wash over me. It wasn't fear, it was sheer power. I marched into the kitchen and yanked out a roll of heavy-duty black trash bags. I went straight to the bathroom, the exact stage of my humiliation from just hours before. I opened Robert's medicine cabinet. I grabbed his expensive cologne, his fancy face creams, his electric razor. All of it went straight into the black plastic bag. I walked into Lucy's room, her makeup, the cheap costume jewelry she left scattered across every surface. Right into the bag. No, wait, I stopped dead in my tracks. That would be stooping down to their miserable level. That would be petty vandalism. That is not who I am. I pulled their things out of the trash bags and laid them out with absolute precision on top of their bed. I wasn't going to lay a finger on their personal belongings. I was only taking what was mine. And the real problem for them was that in this house, it felt like I had even purchased the oxygen they breathed. I moved with a kinetic energy I thought I had lost a decade ago. I started pulling paintings off the drywall. I wrapped my porcelain figurines in old newspaper. I yanked the cords out of the giant television. I emptied the refrigerator of all my groceries, leaving only their diet yogurts and their cheap beer sitting directly on the kitchen tile because the refrigerator was leaving too. While I worked, every sacrifice I ever made flashed before my eyes. I remembered the grease burns up and down my forearms from the boiling fryers just to pay for Lucy's university tuition. I remembered the sleepless nights, crunching numbers at the kitchen table to make sure they never went without. I remembered when Robert got fired from his first job and I stocked their pantry for 6 straight months without asking for a single dime in return. Juiceless old woman, I stared down at my hands, the hands of a blue-collar worker. Hands that have kneaded dough, scrubbed floors, carried heavy boxes, and cared for the sick. These hands are not useless. These hands built this domestic empire from the ground up, and these exact same hands are going to tear it down to the studs. The doorbell buzzed exactly 40 minutes later. Old man Arthur stood there with 3 young built guys. Francis, he greeted me, pulling me into a bear hug that smelled of cheap tobacco and honest sweat. You look exactly the same. Thank you, Arthur. Come on in. Come on in. We are on a tight clock. I want you to take every single thing that has a green piece of tape on it. I had spent the last 20 minutes sticking little squares of green painter's tape onto every piece of furniture, every appliance, every floor lamp. Basically, the entire condo was covered in green dots. And what about the stuff without a sticker? One of the younger guys asked. looking around the living room. He was pointing at a pair of flimsy plastic patio chairs they had dragged in for the balcony and a stained, sunken mattress they kept in the guest room. "That stays," I told him, "just so they can't go around saying I left them with absolutely nothing." They got to work. Watching them dismantle the living room was strangely hypnotic and deeply satisfying. It was like watching a necessary surgical procedure to extract a malignant tumor. The leather sofa went out the front door. The oak dining table followed right behind it. The area rugs were rolled up and hauled away. The neighbors started poking their heads out. Mrs. Gable from 402, a professional busybody, poked her head into the hall with curlers still strapped to her scalp. "Moving out, neighbor?" she asked, eyes wide as saucers. "Not exactly, Gertrude," I answered her with total calm, holding the heavy door open so the guys could dolly the refrigerator past. "I am just doing a very deep spring cleaning. You know how it is. Sometimes the trash just piles up and you have to sanitize the whole environment." By 11 in the morning, the apartment was an echo chamber, a hollow shell with indentations in the carpet where life used to happen. The only things left in the kitchen were the sink, because it was bolted to the plumbing, and the stove, which unfortunately belonged to the building management. In the living room, nothing. In my bedroom, nothing. In their bedroom, just their sad mattress on the floor and piles of their clothes that I had to physically remove from the custom cedar closet, which of course I had also paid for. I stood dead center in the empty living room. The midday sun poured through the curtainless windows without a single obstacle, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. The place looked massive, it looked bright, and for the very first time in 2 solid years, it smelled genuinely clean, truly clean. I reached into my purse and pulled out my keychain. I rubbed my thumb over the heavy brass keys that opened the deadbolt and the security door. But I was missing the grand finale. It wasn't enough to just pack up and leave. I had to make absolutely certain that the message was delivered loud and clear. Leaving zero room for misinterpretation, I walked into the bathroom. The toilet was still sitting there, white, sterile, and lonely. I pulled a thick black permanent marker out of my bag. I crouched down right in front of the toilet seat. My pulse was still dead calm. I uncapped the marker and wrote directly onto the white porcelain lid in large block letters, "Here is the only throne you deserve. Use it in good health." I capped the marker and walked out into the hallway. Arthur was waiting for me downstairs in the cab of the moving truck. I pulled the apartment door shut. I turned the deadbolt twice, but I didn't head for the stairs just yet. I pulled my cell phone out one more time. I had one final call to make before I climbed up into that truck cab and started my brand new life. A call that would alter the rules of this game permanently, because taking the furniture was just the opening act. I dialed the number for the property management company that runs the building. "Mr. Garrison, it's Francis, yes, the owner of Unit 5B. I have some updated instructions regarding the lease agreement that we technically never put in writing with the current occupants." "Yes, listen closely, because you are going to want to hear this." While I was talking to him, I heard the elevator ding and the doors slide open. My heart skipped a beat, thinking they had somehow come home early, but it was just the guy delivering the water jugs. I gave him a warm smile. Today was a spectacular day. Today, the useless old woman was going to prove that she still knows exactly how to cook up a dish that is best served ice cold. I walked down the stairwell, my legs feeling lighter than they had in decades, completely ready to sit in the front row and watch their world burn to the ground. The silence inside room 405 at the Royal Plaza Hotel was so absolute that my ears actually started ringing. There were no slamming doors, no heavy sighs of impatience, no giant television blasting reality shows at top volume. I sat on the edge of the mattress. It was a massive bed, covered in stiff, starched white sheets that smelled like bleach and fresh laundry. Not like that cheap lavender spray I used to mask my own shame just hours ago. I dropped my purse onto the quilt. My hands, the same hands that were shaking with humiliation in front of a broken toilet before the sun came up, were now moving with the cold precision of a surgeon. I pulled out a worn leather folder. The exact same folder Robert always sneered at because he claimed it smelled like an antique store. What my arrogant son-in-law never bothered to figure out was that inside that beat-up leather was the entire history of my life, and far more importantly, the property deed to the golden cage he slept in every night. I flipped the folder open and spread the paperwork across the bed sheets. It was all right there. The deed to the condo, registered exclusively to Frances Ellen Morales. My investment portfolio statements, the cash payout from selling the copper pot, and the receipts for every single utility bill. For 2 entire years, I had made myself small. I had shrunk my entire existence just to fit into the tiny corner they allowed me, practically apologizing for breathing, for taking up physical space, for having basic human bodily functions. Useless old woman, he had called me. I stared down at the numbers printed on the paper. My eyes tracked the balance of my life savings, the hard-earned result of 40 years of waking up at 4 a.m. to hand-pick the best tomatoes at the wholesale market. Useless, I whispered out loud, and the word sounded utterly ridiculous bouncing off the hotel air conditioning. Useless. I was the woman who went toe-to-toe with suppliers who acted like loan sharks when I became a widow at 40. I was the woman who figured out how to fix a commercial deep fryer with a butter knife because the repairman ghosted us and the lunch rush was breathing down my neck. I was the woman who took a rundown dive bar and turned it into the most respected diner in the downtown grid. And despite all of that, I had allowed a man who doesn't even know how to screw in a light bulb make me feel like I belonged in a dumpster. I got up and walked over to the minibar. I pulled out a glass bottle of sparkling water, cold and sweating. As the carbonation hit the back of my throat, I felt the thick fog of sadness evaporate, making way for a razor-sharp mental clarity I hadn't experienced in years. It was like I had been trapped in a medically induced coma caused by maternal guilt and blind love. And Robert's screaming fit was the defibrillator paddles that shocked me back to life. I walked over to the full-length mirror leaning against the hotel wall. I didn't see the disheveled, pathetic old woman from the middle of the night. I saw Frances. I saw the deep lines on my face, sure, but now they looked like a map of wars I had fought and won. I looked at my wide hips, the ones Lucy always complained about because she said I took up too much room in the hallway, and I remembered that those exact hips had carried children, hoisted crates of inventory, and supported the dead weight of an entire family. I dug into my bag and pulled out my old calculator, that heavy gray Casio I've carried around since 1998. The numbers on the keys were completely rubbed off from decades of use, but my fingers knew the layout by pure muscle memory. I started punching in the math. I added up the monthly HOA fees I covered. I added up the electricity, the water, the natural gas I paid for. I added in the high-speed fiber optic internet that Robert demanded for his online gaming and movie streaming, which I paid for. I added in the monthly subscription for the maid service that came twice a week, even though they constantly claimed I sat around doing nothing, which I paid for. The final number on that LCT screen blinked at me like a criminal indictment. It was a small fortune. A fortune I was handing over every single month in exchange for being treated like garbage. I sat back down on the bed, holding the calculator in one hand and Robert's bank statement in the other. Oh yes, I had full access to his accounts. About a year ago, when they fell dangerously behind on their credit card bills, Robert practically begged me in tears to float him the cash for the minimum payment. In a blind panic, he handed over his login credentials so I could wire the money directly. He never bothered to change the password. His sheer arrogance convinced him I was way too stupid to remember a password or figure out how to navigate a banking app. I opened the app on my phone and logged in. What stared back at me made me let out a dry, humorless bark of a laugh. Robert, the highly successful executive who looked down his nose at me in his cheap polyester suits, was drowning in the red. They were living paycheck to paycheck, and honestly, it was worse than that. They owed money on the very clothes on their backs. Their savings account was a ghost town. They blew every cent they had on keeping up appearances, buying overpriced dinners just to post photos on social media, and making payments on that brand new car they had no business driving. So, useless old woman, I muttered to myself, swiping my finger across the glass screen. It turns out this useless old woman is the only wall standing between you and the homeless shelter, little boy. The raw reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. I was never the burden. I was the load-bearing pillar. I was the concrete foundation, the drywall, and the shingles on the roof. They were just the cheap, tacky decorations rotting away from the dampness. I remembered all the times Lucy used to roll her eyes and say, "Oh, Mom, you just don't understand how the modern world works." She was dead right. I don't understand a world where you burn through cash you don't even have just to impress strangers who couldn't care less if you drop dead. But I do understand leverage. Power isn't screaming your lungs out at 3 a.m. because something smells bad. Power is holding the master key to the valve that keeps everyone else's life running. And my hand was resting dead center on the main shutoff. I leaned back against the plush hotel pillows, lacing my fingers behind my head. I thought about two of them. By now, they had to be getting back from their shifts. I pictured the scene in my head. Robert jamming his key into the deadbolt, shoving the door open, fully expecting to smell dinner on the stove, or at the very least, find his favorite punching bag sitting there so he could unload his daily stress. Instead, they were going to walk into a void, an echo chamber, but stripping the condo bare was just step one. Taking the furniture was an emotional reflex, a primal need to protect my assets. Now it was time for the tactical strike. Now it was time to show them that this old woman doesn't just know how to scrub a toilet bowl, she knows how to run a hostile takeover. And unfortunately for them, this family had turned into a toxic asset that required immediate liquidation. I grabbed a piece of hotel stationery from the nightstand and clicked my fountain pen, the one my husband gave me before he passed. I started outlining the operation. I wasn't going to launch a frontal assault. I wasn't going to show up and scream at them. That is trashy. That is exactly what Robert does. I was going to operate entirely from the shadows with the cold, silent efficiency of a woman who has run a commercial kitchen for 40 years. Phase 1, utilities. Phase 2, access. Phase 3, legal action. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was 5 p.m. The customer service lines for the power company and the internet provider closed at 6. I had a window. I dialed the first number. It was my cable and internet provider. "Good afternoon," I said, slipping into the sugary sweet customer service voice I used to calm down furious diners. "This is the account holder for 8940B. Yes, Francis Morales. Listen, sweetheart, I am going to be traveling out of state for an extended period, and I need to suspend my service immediately." "Ah, yes. We can process that right away." "Fantastic. Yes, pull the plug on everything today. No, don't even leave the basic cable package active. It's time for some people to rest their eyes from staring at screens all day." I hung up. A warm, glowing ember of satisfaction settled right in the center of my chest. I pictured Robert walking in, yanking his tie loose, dropping his briefcase, and throwing himself onto the floor, since his leather couch was gone, trying to turn on the TV that wasn't there, or trying to connect his phone to the Wi-Fi just so he could complain about his miserable life on Facebook. No connection. Those two little words were going to sting worse than a backhand to the jaw. Next, I dialed the electric company. "Emergencies dispatch." No emergency, son. I need to request a complete shutoff for a major renovation." "Yes, the unit is entirely vacant." "Yes, I am the deed holder. I need you to cut the power to the unit first thing tomorrow morning." Reason for shutoff? Well, let's just say we have a severe pest problem in the wiring. Some parasites got into the system, and they are draining way too much power. It is better to just cut the main line to prevent the whole place from catching fire. Do you follow me? The kid in the call center definitely didn't catch the metaphor, but he typed the order into his system. Tomorrow morning, when Robert's alarm went off, assuming his phone battery hadn't died overnight, there would be no electricity to run the coffee maker. There would be no hot water for his shower. There would be absolutely nothing. I stood up and walked over to the window. From the fourth floor of the hotel, I watched the grid of the city moving below me. People hustling down the sidewalks, cabs laying on their horns. I felt plugged back into the world. I was no longer the prisoner locked in the spare room. My phone buzzed on the mattress. It was Lucy. I let it ring 1, 2, 3 times. It stopped. Then it buzzed again. Robert. I let it ring out. I wasn't ready to talk to either of them. Not yet. First, they needed a crash course in the language of poverty. They needed to feel the physical sting of walking into a home that aggressively rejects you. They needed to sit in the stench of their own misery without having a scapegoat to point a finger at. I reached back into my leather folder and pulled out a smaller envelope. Inside was a crisp business card the property management lawyer had handed me that morning, right before I climbed into Arthur's truck. Mr. Garrison, specializing in evictions and hostile family disputes. A stone-faced guy, the kind who doesn't laugh at jokes but locks his jaw like a pit bull the second you hand him a target. I was scheduled to sit down with him tomorrow at 10 a.m., but my brain, honed as sharp as a chef's knife, was already drafting the exact script of what I was going to command him to do. I didn't just want to kick them out onto the curb. That was too simple. They have squatters' rights, some bleeding hearts might argue. They are your flesh and blood, others would say. But in my reality, in Francis's world, respect is the only currency that matters, and their accounts were severely overdrawn. My mind drifted back to the night before, the smell, my burning shame, the look of absolute revulsion on Robert's face. The whole house stinks. I smiled. It was a jagged smile that never quite reached my eyes. You hit the nail on the head, Robert, I whispered to the empty room. It did stink. It stank to high heaven of ingratitude. But don't you worry, I am airing the place out. I sat back down on the edge of the mattress and clicked on the hotel television. I flipped it to a cooking network. Some guy was braising a lamb stew. I watched his technique closely. He was short on rosemary and he was sweating his onions way too fast. Amateur, I critiqued out loud. Suddenly, my stomach growled like a feral dog. I hadn't put a single piece of food in my mouth since that suffocating breakfast with them. I picked up the phone and ordered room service, a bowl of French onion soup, a heavy pepper steak, and a heavy pour of red wine. Yes, wine. Tonight, I was raising a glass to myself. While I waited for the cart to arrive, my cell phone vibrated against the nightstand again. This time, it was a text message from Robert. My curiosity got the better of my discipline, and I tapped the screen. Francis, what the hell did you do? Where is all my stuff? Where is the TV? Answer your phone right now, or I am calling the cops. I threw my head back and laughed. It was a deep, guttural laugh that started in the pit of my stomach and ripped out of my throat. It was loud, chaotic, and completely liberating. Call the cops? To report what, exactly? That his mother-in-law hired movers to take her own furniture out of a condo she legally owned. I typed out a blistering response with my thumbs, but I didn't hit send. I deleted the whole paragraph. Silence is a much more psychological torture for people who are addicted to being the center of the universe. The food arrived. The rich, heavy scent of seared steak filled the room. Hearty, expensive, elegant. A million miles away from the suffocating stench of bleach and cheap aerosol lavender. I sliced off a piece of the beef, let the juices hit my tongue, and closed my eyes. I was alone, sure, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I didn't feel lonely. I had my own back. I had Francis, the CEO, Francis, the mother, even if my daughter had completely failed me, and Francis, the woman. Tomorrow was the day I dropped the legal hammer. Tomorrow I would sit in the lawyer's office. But tonight was all about sitting in the bleachers and enjoying the carnage from a safe distance. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that in that pitch-black, stripped-down apartment, the real stench was just starting to seep out of the walls. And this time, there wasn't going to be anyone there on their hands and knees to scrub it away for them. I raised my wine glass toward my reflection in the mirror. Cheers, useless old woman, I toasted myself. Let's see how they keep the lights on when the garbage stops paying the bills. I took a long, slow sip. The wine was full-bodied and perfect, and the night was just getting started, mister. Garrison's office smelled like antique mahogany and expensive furniture polish. It was a heavy, serious scent that demanded respect, a far cry from the damp mildew and dollar store air freshener I had left behind in my own condo. I sat perfectly straight in the winged leather chair across from his desk, my hands neatly folded over the clasp of my purse. I wasn't sitting there to ask for a favor. I was there to issue a directive. "All right then, Francis," Garrison said, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose as he scanned the stack of documents I had slid across his desk. "You want to initiate a formal eviction process for unauthorized occupants, essentially, on the grounds that there is no written lease agreement and zero rent has been paid." "That is exactly right, Mr. Garrison. They have been living under that roof strictly through my grace and my impatience. Both of those accounts ran completely dry at 3 a.m. yesterday." Garrison gave a slow nod, dragging a heavy fountain pen across a legal pad. The scratching of the nib on the paper was a rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound. I liked that sound. It was the sound of the machine working properly. No screaming, no theatrics. Just the cold gears of consequences turning. The deed to the property is in your name. All the utility accounts are registered to you, and there isn't a single piece of paper that gives them the legal right to occupy the premises if you revoke your verbal consent, he explained, looking up from his notes. Legally speaking, this is a slam dunk. Emotionally, these things tend to get messy. Are you absolutely certain you want to bring the full weight of the law down on your own daughter? I stared dead into his eyes. Garrison was a guy in his mid-50s who looked like he had refereed 1,000 vicious family bloodbaths. He was probably waiting for me to flinch, to pull a crumpled tissue out of my purse and start bawling about my poor, misguided Lucy. "Mr. Garrison, for 40 years I ran a commercial kitchen. If a cut of meat goes rotten in the walk-in, you throw it straight into the dumpster so it doesn't contaminate the entire stew," I answered. My voice was pure steel. I didn't bat an eyelash. My son-in-law looked me in the face and called me a useless, stinking old woman. My daughter sat there, kept her mouth shut, and co-signed his disrespect with her silence. "I am not sitting in your office for revenge. I am here for pest control. File the paperwork. Understood. I will have the notary draft the demand letter this afternoon. By law, they have a set window to vacate the premises voluntarily. The second that clock runs out, we file the lawsuit. I want them served today," I demanded, leaning forward slightly. "Serve them at their jobs if you have to. I want them to feel that hot flush of public humiliation. The exact same humiliation I felt standing in my own hallway." I walked out of that law firm feeling a physical weight lift off my ribcage. The midday sun was beating down hard on the pavement, glaring off the concrete canyons of the city. I felt like a 4-star general who had just authorized an artillery strike. My cell phone, which had been set to do not disturb since I walked into the lobby, buzzed in my palm like a trapped hornet. I glanced at the screen. 37 missed calls. 20 from Robert, 15 from Lucy, and 2 from a blocked number that was probably a desk phone at one of their offices. There was also a massive wall of unread text messages and WhatsApp voice notes. I found a bench in a small park a block away, sitting under the heavy shade of an old oak tree, and decided it was finally time to listen to the symphony I had composed. I slipped my reading glasses onto my nose and opened Robert's text thread. "Francis, what the hell is wrong with you? Come back here right now and bring our stuff. The power is completely dead. Did you forget to pay the bill? You are so damn useless. You probably forgot. Francis, I just walked in and the place is stripped. You stole my furniture. I am calling the cops right now. You are out of your mind, you demented old hag." I tapped the play button on one of the voice notes. His voice was distorted, cracking with raw panic and rage, screaming into the microphone. In the background, I could hear Lucy sobbing hysterically. "Mom took the curtains." "Robert! I don't even have a place to sit down," she wailed in the audio. "Shut your mouth, Lucy. Your mother went psychotic. This is grand larceny. Francis, pick up the goddamn phone." I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a cold, tight grimace of absolute vindication. Robert, the man who walked around acting like the king of the castle, was violently discovering that his throne was a rental and his crown was made of tin foil. What he was calling grand larceny was simply me repossessing my own portfolio. I stood up from the bench and headed straight toward the financial district. I still had to execute phase 2 of my operation, the financial blockade. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the bank branch where I had kept my accounts since the days I was slinging homemade pies out of a wicker basket. The branch manager, Mr. Miller, spotted me from his glass-walled office and waved me over. "Francis, always a pleasure. Are we handling the usual deposits today?" "Not today, Mr. Miller. Today I am executing some corporate downsizing, you could say." I sat down in the plush chair across from his desk and slapped my debit and credit cards onto the blotter. "I need you to immediately cancel the authorized user cards issued to Robert Gomez and Lucy Morales. And I need a hard block on any and all automated transfers linking my checking account to theirs." Miller raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. He was well aware that I floated them a heavy monthly allowance to keep them afloat. "Everything, Francis? Even the auto draft for Mr. Gomez's car insurance?" "Especially the car insurance," I said, tapping my index finger against the edge of his mahogany desk. "And the cell phone plans. And the premium gym membership they haven't used in a year. Shut the main valve, Mr. Miller. Do not let a single drop of my money leak into their accounts. They are going to be completely exposed, Francis. If they have automated bills trying to pull from empty accounts, those charges are going to bounce hard. They'll be hit with severe overdraft penalties." "That is exactly the point," I replied, holding his gaze without blinking. "I want them to learn a very hard lesson. Money doesn't grow on trees, and it sure as hell doesn't magically materialize out of this useless old woman's checking account." I walked out of that bank feeling 5 years younger. My stomach started to rumble. I headed over to a little hole-in-the-wall joint I know a few blocks away that makes a decent heavy pot roast. I asked the hostess for a table for one and powered my phone completely off. I wasn't going to let their digital screaming ruin my digestion. While I chewed my food, my mind wandered back to the condo. By this hour, Robert had to be realizing this wasn't just a blown transformer on the block. They had to have noticed the Wi-Fi router was dead. I pictured the stripped apartment, silent, echoing, the temperature steadily rising because the central air conditioning was dead in the water. The refrigerator. I dropped my fork onto my plate with a clatter. The refrigerator was packed to the brim with the massive grocery haul I had done on Sunday morning. Ground beef, milk, fresh produce. Without electricity to keep the compressor running, all of that food was going to start rotting in a matter of hours in this brutal heat. "The whole house stinks!" he had screamed at me. The sheer poetry of it was so sweet it almost made my teeth ache. Oh, it was going to stink now, all right. And this time, it was going to reek of his own pathetic inability to handle a crisis. I wiped my mouth, paid the check, and powered my phone back on. A call came through the exact second it found a signal. It was Lucy. I decided they had suffered in the dark long enough. It was time to flick the first domino and let them watch it fall. I swiped the green button to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice smooth and relaxed, like I had just woken up from a Sunday afternoon nap. "Mom!" Lucy's shriek was so piercing I had to physically pull the phone away from my ear. "Mom! Oh my God, where are you? We are freaking out. Robert is losing his mind." "Hi, honey. I am doing wonderfully. Thank you so much for asking." "Doing wonderfully? Mom, you stripped the house. The place is gutted. We don't have power. There's no hot water. Robert is screaming that he's going to sue you." "Put him on the line," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave. There was the sound of a physical struggle over the receiver, and then Robert's voice, panting and dripping with venom, blasted into my ear. "Listen to me, you psychotic old bat. You have exactly 1 hour to get a truck back here with my furniture and turn the goddamn breaker back on, or I swear to God I am going to hunt you down and drag you back here by your hair. This is elder abuse. I am a respectable professional." "Robert, you need to lower your voice right now," I told him, using the exact same tone I used to break the spirits of delivery drivers who tried to short me on inventory. "First of all, it is not your furniture. It is my furniture. I have the receipts in a folder for every single chair, every painting, and every fork in that kitchen. Second, it is my house. The deed is in my name. And third, and I need you to pay very close attention to this part, you are officially trespassing on my property. What the hell are you talking about? I live here. I have tenant rights. You had privileges, Robert, not rights. And you permanently forfeited those privileges last night when you decided my breathing the same air as you was an offense to your nostrils. You complained that the house stank because it was my fault. Well, I acted like a responsible homeowner and removed the source of the odor. I left. Now, if the condo stinks, you have nobody to blame but yourselves. You can't do this to us, he roared into the phone, but I could hear the distinct tremor in his vocal cords. Real, creeping panic was starting to bleed through the cracks in his macho facade. We don't have the cash to put down a deposit on a new place right now. Maybe on the first of the month, but not today. That sounds like a personal problem. You are young, you are in your prime, you are highly useful, aren't you? Not a burden like me. I'm sure a smart guy like you will figure it out. Oh, and Robert? What? Check your corporate email and tell Lucy to check hers too. My attorney just served you with formal eviction notices. You have 30 days to vacate the premises by law. And I strongly suggest you do your packing while the sun's up, because I highly doubt the power company is going to break their backs rushing to reconnect a grid for an account I just permanently closed. I hit the red button and ended the call before he could spit out another word. I sat there staring at the black screen for a few seconds. My heart was thumping a little harder against my ribs, but it wasn't out of fear. It was the pure, uncut adrenaline of finally dropping a 100-pound rucksack I had been carrying on my spine for 2 years. I stood up, threw some cash on the table, and left a massive tip. The waiter gave me a bright smile. Have a great afternoon, ma'am. I absolutely will, son. Believe me, I will. I decided I didn't want to head back to the hotel room just yet. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I needed to see it. Not out of some sick voyeurism, but because I needed the psychological closure. I hailed a yellow cab and told the driver to drop me off at the corner of my block, making sure he didn't idle in front of the lobby doors. I slipped into a corner booth at a coffee shop across the street. It had massive plate glass windows that gave me a front row, high-definition view of the entrance to my building. I ordered a tall iced tea and settled in to watch the show. Right at 4 p.m., I saw Robert burst through the lobby doors. His dress shirt was completely unbuttoned at the collar, and his face was flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. He was sweating profusely. He was pacing back and forth on the concrete sidewalk, holding his phone to his ear, violently chopping the air with his free hand. From across the street, he looked incredibly small. He looked pathetic and vulgar. Lucy dragged herself out of the building a few minutes later. She had ditched her corporate heels for a pair of flat sandals, and her hair was tied back in a messy, greasy ponytail. She collapsed onto the concrete steps leading up to the lobby doors and buried her face in her hands. It physically hurt my chest to see her like that. I won't lie to you and say it didn't. She is my flesh and blood. But sometimes, if a bone sets wrong, a doctor has to re-break it so it can heal straight. She had sat there and allowed that man to completely strip me of my dignity. She had allowed him to turn me into an unpaid maid inside the walls I bought. She desperately needed to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet, far away from his toxic shadow and the safety net of my apron. Suddenly, a white delivery van pulled up to the curb. The logo on the side belonged to a big box electronics retailer. The driver hopped out of the cab and walked up to Robert. I watched Robert aggressively rip his wallet out of his back pocket, pull out a credit card, and swipe it through the driver's portable terminal. The driver looked at the screen and shook his head. Robert argued, pulled out a second card, and swiped it. The driver shook his head again. Robert completely lost his mind, screaming in the poor delivery guy's face and kicking the air like a toddler throwing a tantrum. The delivery driver, a thick, burly guy who clearly didn't get paid enough to tolerate abuse, turned around, climbed back into his van, and drove off. He took whatever Robert was trying to buy with him, probably a portable air conditioning unit or a heavy-duty fan he was trying to emergency purchase. The cards had declined. Mr. Miller at the bank didn't waste a second. I watched Robert violently hurl his leather wallet onto the concrete sidewalk and kick it into the gutter. Lucy didn't even flinch. She just kept staring at the pavement. Right at that exact second, my cell phone lit up on the diner table. It was a text message from Robert. "Please, Frances, we need to talk. Lucy is feeling physically sick. The heat in this apartment is brutal. Please don't be cruel." Cruel. The word pulsed on the glowing screen. My mind instantly snapped back to the night before. I remembered my frail, trembling hand gripping the broken toilet lever. I remembered the vile grimace of disgust twisting his face. I remembered exactly how I felt in that hallway. Like garbage, like an obstacle, like something you scrape off the bottom of your shoe. I typed out my response with slow, deliberate keystrokes, savoring the weight of every single letter. Cruelty, Robert, is looking the woman who put a roof over your head in the eye and telling her she stinks. What you are currently experiencing is not cruelty. It is reality, and reality costs cold, hard cash. If Lucy is feeling sick, be a man and check her into a hotel. Oh, wait, I really hope you have cash on hand. I hit send. Through the tinted glass of the coffee shop, I watched Robert pull his phone out of his pocket and read the text. I watched his entire body lock up. He froze solid. He slowly lifted his head and started scanning his surroundings in a panic. His eyes frantically swept up and down the avenue, looking at the parked cars, the apartment windows, and finally the coffee shop across the street. For a fraction of a second, our eyes locked across 4 lanes of traffic and a pane of polarized glass. He couldn't actually see me sitting in the shadows, but I felt it in my bones that he knew I was sitting right there. He knew the useless old woman was watching him squirm from a tactical high ground he never, in his wildest dreams, imagined I possessed. His arms went limp and dropped to his sides. Every ounce of his trademark arrogance drained out of his posture, leaving behind nothing but crushing defeat and absolute, terrifying confusion. I took the last sip of my iced tea. The ice cubes clinked loudly against the empty glass. It was time to head back to the hotel and prep the battlefield for tomorrow. Because this war wasn't going to end just by cutting the breaker and freezing the bank accounts. Tomorrow morning, I was going to have to look Lucy in the eye, and I knew that was going to be the bloodiest battle of the entire campaign. But today I had reclaimed something infinitely more valuable than my oak dining table. I had taken back my dignity. I walked out of the coffee shop and headed toward the taxi stand on the corner. I kept my chin up and my stride locked, leaving the two of them to melt into the hot concrete across the street. The curriculum had just begun, and I was the one holding the chalkboard, the chalk, and the eraser. The night inside room 405 of the Royal Plaza Hotel was the most peaceful stretch of sleep I had experienced in years, despite the fact that my cell phone kept lighting up on the nightstand like a frantic firefly. I had muted all the notifications, but the screen flashed every 10 minutes. Text messages from Robert, frantic calls from Lucy, unhinged voicemails from burner numbers that I knew they had to be borrowing from coworkers I didn't pick up. I let my absolute silence act as the concrete wall they were repeatedly crashing their heads against. When I woke up, I called down for a massive room service spread, huevos rancheros, freshly squeezed orange juice, and premium dark roast coffee. As I casually spread butter across a piece of warm toast, I pictured exactly what their morning looked like. Without any curtains to block it, the brutal morning sun would have blasted them right in the face at 6 a.m., waking them up on a rock-hard floor. No hot coffee, no hot shower to wash off the sweat, and the suffocating stench of hundreds of dollars of groceries quietly rotting inside a dead refrigerator. Sometimes poetic justice smells exactly like spoiled milk. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked through the heavy glass doors of Mr. Garrison's law firm. I had dressed in my absolute best tailored suit, a sharp navy blue number I used to wear to the bank when I was negotiating commercial loans for the restaurant. I wore my good pearls and had my hair styled impeccably. The useless old woman was going to look like $1,000,000. "Good morning, Frances," Garrison said, standing up and gesturing toward the heavy leather chair across from his desk. "Your tenants, or rather, Your unauthorized squatters have been blowing up my receptionist's phone since 8 a.m. They are demanding a sit-down with you. They claim it is an absolute matter of life and death. To people like them, Mr. Garrison, losing their creature comforts feels exactly like death, I replied, smoothly opening my folding hand fan and resting it on my lap. Tell the front desk to send them back. I am fully prepared to receive them. We sat there and waited for 20 minutes. When the heavy wooden door finally swung open, the sight that walked into the room was genuinely pathetic. Robert, the guy who spent half his life bragging about his slick corporate aesthetic, was wearing the exact same dress shirt from yesterday. It was deeply wrinkled and stained with yellow sweat rings under the armpits. He had heavy, bruised bags under his eyes and a layer of greasy stubble that made him look like a vagrant. Lucy shuffled in right behind him. Her eyes were swollen shut from crying all night. Her hair was slick with grease and tied up in a chaotic bun, and she was wearing a sundress she had clearly pulled out of the dirty laundry hamper because she didn't have a working iron. The smell they dragged into the climate-controlled office hit me instantly. They smelled like pure stress, stale sweat, and damp mildew. They smelled like absolute defeat. Robert marched in first, his fists balled up at his sides, but he stopped dead in his tracks the second he saw me sitting there, crisp, collected, smelling of expensive perfume, with my hands resting calmly on my lap. "You," he barked, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger right at my face. "You are out of your goddamn mind. Do you have any idea what we went through last night? We slept on the hardwood floor." "On the floor, Francis, like stray dogs." "And a very good morning to you too, Robert," I said, my voice smooth as silk, snapping my hand fan open with a sharp flick of my wrist. "Take a seat, assuming you still remember how to act in a civilized setting, considering you completely forgot how to speak to human beings." "I am not sitting down," he roared, stepping aggressively toward the desk. "I am filing a massive lawsuit against you. You stole my peace of mind. You stole my personal property. You illegally froze my credit cards. That is financial abuse. I am your son-in-law, for Christ's sake, mister." Garrison cleared his throat. In the quiet office, the sound hit like a cinder block dropping to the bottom of an empty well. "Mr. Gomez, I strongly advise you to regulate your volume," the lawyer warned, his voice dangerously calm. "You are standing inside a legal firm, and every single threat you make in this room can and will be logged for the civil suit that is currently being drafted against you. Furthermore, regarding the credit accounts, my understanding is that the primary account holder is Mrs. Frances Morales. You were merely an authorized secondary user, a courtesy which, as of yesterday, has been legally terminated." Lucy collapsed into one of the leather chairs next to me, burying her face in her hands and sobbing violently. "Mom, please," she wailed through her fingers. "We don't have a single dollar. Robert tried to swipe his card for breakfast at a diner this morning, and it declined in front of everyone. We don't have enough gas in the tank to drive anywhere. We have nowhere to sleep. Why are you doing this to us?" It was just one stupid argument. Robert was just stressed out and tired. I turned my head and looked at her. My daughter. The little girl whose hair I used to braid before school. The kid whose scraped knees I used to clean with iodine. Now she was a 35-year-old woman crying in a lawyer's office because Mommy cut off her platinum credit card. "It was not an argument, Lucy," I corrected her, snapping my fan shut and pointing the tip directly at her chest. "It was an epiphany." Robert looked at me and declared that I was a burden, a useless old hag who stank up the house I paid for. And you sat there in your bedroom and kept your mouth shut. Your silence was the signature on the eviction notice. Robert slammed his open palm down on Garrison's desk. "I was running hot," he snapped, trying to excuse himself, though his eyes were darting around the room looking for an exit strategy. People say things when they're pissed off. But you premeditated this. You are a cold, calculating witch. You know what? I don't give a damn. Keep your blood money. We are hiring a litigator, and we are taking that condo. We have lived there for 2 years. We have established squatters' rights." I laughed. It was a sharp, single bark of a laugh that cut through the tension. "Be my guest, Robert. Go ahead and put a lawyer on retainer," I said. reaching into my designer purse and pulling out the beat-up leather folder. "But before you write that retainer check, I think you need to look at this." I slid the heavy folder across the polished wood of the desk, stopping it right in front of him. "What the hell is this?" he asked, eyeing the leather like it was rigged to explode. "It's reality, Robert. Open it." He yanked the cover open aggressively. His eyes dropped to the very first document. It was a printed Excel spreadsheet, packed with rows and columns of highly detailed accounting. "That right there is the grand total of every single dollar I have subsidized for your lifestyle over the last 4 months," I explained, tapping my fingernail against the paper. "Fair market rent for a unit that size in that zip code, $2, $500 a month. Electricity, water, and gas. The high-speed fiber optic internet package you demanded, $150 a month. The balance on your credit cards that I quietly paid off so your credit score wouldn't tank, averaging $500 a month. Groceries, the maid service, your premium car insurance, and the short-term loans you swore you'd pay back and never did." Robert's face went completely pale. The blood drained out of his cheeks as he flipped to the second page. "In grand total, Robert, the two of you have burned through over $100,000 of my life savings in 2 years. $100,000 that I bled for, sweating my life away over a commercial fryer while you play corporate hotshot at a desk job that pays you absolute peanuts." Lucy lifted her head, her jaw physically dropping. "That much, Mom?" she whispered, horrified. "Yes, Lucy, that much. And what was the return on my massive investment?" Getting screamed at like a dog at 3 a.m., being looked at with absolute disgust. "You two treated me like I was a broken lamp taking up space in the hallway." Robert shoved the folder back across the desk, desperately trying to scrape together whatever scraps of arrogance he had left. But he just looked small. He looked ridiculous. "Money isn't everything," he shouted, but his voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. "We are family. Family is supposed to have each other's backs." "Support is a two-way street, little boy," I fired back, standing up from my chair. Standing over them, I felt 10 feet tall. "I supported your entire existence with my checkbook and my physical labor. You supported me with verbal abuse. The social contract has been officially terminated." "We are not leaving," Robert insisted, though he sounded like a cornered rat now. "I am calling a locksmith and changing the deadbolt. You can't just throw us out onto the street like trash." Mr. Garrison finally jumped back in, sliding a manila envelope across the desk toward them. "Actually, Mr. Gomez, the deadbolt on the unit was drilled and replaced at 8 a.m. this morning by a licensed locksmith under my direct physical supervision while you two were on your way to this meeting. Your personal clothing, your toiletries, and that mattress you left on the floor were packed into boxes by a bonded moving crew. They are currently sitting in a storage unit that has been prepaid for exactly 30 days. Inside that envelope is the address to the facility and the key to the master lock." Robert froze solid. His mouth kept opening and closing, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on the deck of a boat. The last trace of color vanished from his face. "What?" he stammered. "You broke into my house?" "It is my house, Robert," I reminded him coldly, "and since I cut the power to the unit yesterday, the security alarm was dead. Nobody had to force anything open." Lucy started sobbing even harder, a deep, hyperventilating wail of genuine panic. "Where are we supposed to go, Mom?" she gasped, choking on her tears. "We don't have a dime. Robert is 3 months behind on the car note. If we don't make a payment by Friday, the bank is going to repossess it." "Then let the repo man tow it," I said, my voice devoid of any pity. "Maybe losing the car will force you to learn how to walk. Walking clears the mind, and you two are going to need to do a hell of a lot of critical thinking to dig your way out of the grave you dug for yourselves." I walked over to the massive window of the law firm. Looking down, I could see the sprawling, indifferent grid of the city. My chest ached. Of course it did. Watching my own daughter completely shatter wasn't my idea of a fun Tuesday morning. But I knew, with the ironclad certainty that only comes from surviving a hard life, that if I handed them a single-dollar bill right now, I would be condemning them to be helpless parasites for the rest of their natural lives. "Mom." Lucy stood up from her chair and took a step toward me, reaching out for a hug. I took a hard step backward. No, Lucy. Do not touch me with the same hands that refused to defend me. She froze in her tracks, looking like I had just slapped her across the face. I am just a useless old woman, remember? I continued, pivoting on my heels to face them one last time. So incredibly useless that I don't even know how to flush a toilet properly. Well, this useless old woman just gave you a master class in how to wield something infinitely more dangerous. Capital. You looked at me and mistook my generosity for weakness. You confused my kindness for utter stupidity. Robert buried his hands in his greasy hair, violently pulling at the roots. He looked like a man standing on the absolute razor's edge of a nervous breakdown. Frances, please, he begged, his voice cracking. It was the first time in 2 years he had spoken my name without a thick layer of sarcasm. We have nowhere to go. My parents live 3 states away. We don't have any friends who can spot us rent money this fast. Just give us 1 week. 1 week to figure things out. I am begging you on my hands and knees. I stared at him. I stared at the man who had screamed, "The house stinks," in my face less than 48 hours ago. Now, he was the one reeking of absolute desperation. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp white envelope, and tossed it onto Garrison's desk. "There is $150 in there," I told him. Robert's bloodshot eyes lit up with a flash of pathetic, desperate hope. "That is exactly enough cash to cover 2 nights at the Travelers Motel right off the interstate exit. It isn't the Royal Plaza, but the doors lock and the toilets flush. And I highly suggest you take quick showers because management over there will upcharge you if you drain the hot water tank." Robert stared at the white envelope like it was a live grenade, but he reached out and snatched it off the desk. He took it because he was out of options. His ego was officially worth less than 3 $50 bills. 2 nights, I repeated, my voice like crushed glass. You have exactly 48 hours to pick up a second job, sell that luxury car you can't afford, or start begging strangers who don't know your true colors nearly as well as I do. Mom, you can't just throw us to the wolves like this, Lucy whispered, her voice totally hollow. I already did, honey, and trust me, one day you are either going to thank me for this, or you are going to hate my guts until the day I die. But either way, you are going to respect me. I shot a look at Mr. Garrison. He stood up from his leather chair, signaling that the execution was over. Please exit the premises, the attorney ordered firmly. Mrs. Morales has other legal matters to attend to. And as a final reminder, you are legally barred from stepping foot on the condo property. The lobby security guards have your photographs printed out and have strict orders to call the police if you so much as step on the welcome mat. Robert jammed the envelope into his front pocket. He shot me a look of pure, concentrated hatred, heavily diluted by sheer terror, and grabbed Lucy by the forearm. Let's get out of here, he spat through gritted teeth. Stop begging her. This crazy old hag lost her mind. Let her die alone, rotting in her pile of cash. I would rather die alone than live in bad company, I fired back, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. And don't stress yourself out about the money, Robert. I'm going to make sure I blow every last cent of it on first-class flights and expensive wine before I drop dead. I wouldn't want you getting your hopes up for an inheritance. They dragged their feet out of the office. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind them. It was a deeply satisfying, definitive click. Silence flooded the room again, but this time it wasn't a heavy, suffocating silence. It was a clean, sterile silence. I let myself drop back into the leather chair. I could feel my knees shaking slightly, not out of fear, but from the massive adrenaline dump leaving my nervous system. That was, without a doubt, the most brutal negotiation I had ever survived in my life, harder than dealing with cutthroat meat suppliers or corrupt health inspectors. I had just negotiated the freedom of my own bloodline. Garrison looked at me, a deep respect etched into his face. You played that incredibly hard, Frances. When you find gangrene, Mr. Garrison, you hack the limb off clean, I replied, pulling a silk handkerchief from my purse to dab away a single rogue tear that had managed to escape the corner of my eye. If I had blinked for even a second, If I had caved and given them 30 days, in 2 weeks they would be right back on my leather sofa, watching my television while I stood in the kitchen cooking their dinner. "So, what is the next move?" he asked. I stood back up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The sun was absolutely blinding over the city skyline. Somewhere down there on the sweltering pavement, Robert and Lucy were desperately trying to hail a cab with their $150, slamming face first into the real world for the first time in years. I, on the other hand, had a totally empty apartment, a fully funded bank account, and a future that, for the first time in a very long time, belonged exclusively to me. "Now, Mr. Garrison," I said, snapping my purse shut, "now I am going to go downtown and buy brand new furniture. Furniture that I actually like, and I might just hire a contractor to paint the walls. I always wanted a bright yellow living room, but Robert always complained it looked tacky. Well, now my living room is going to be as yellow as the damn sun, and if they think it's ugly, they don't have to look at it." I slung my bag over my shoulder. I reached into my pocket and felt the heavy brass keys to my condo. They were heavy, sure, but it was a deeply comforting weight, the undeniable weight of ownership. "Oh, and Mr. Garrison," I added, pausing with my hand on the brass doorknob, "have your billing department email me the invoice for your retainer today. Unlike my son-in-law, I settle my debts in cash up front." I walked out of the high-rise building, taking slow, deliberate steps, letting the hot city wind hit my face. I didn't feel like an old woman. I felt like a seasoned veteran. And the world, which just 48 hours ago felt like a suffocating prison of ingratitude, now looked like a wide-open menu, just waiting for me to order whatever the hell I wanted. The useless old woman had just fired her bosses. And damn, did it feel good to own the company again. 6 months have passed since the moving truck hauled the wreckage of my old life into a storage unit. And if I am being completely honest with you, I still wake up every morning with a smile on my face. My condo is no longer that depressing cave of neutral grays and pretentious minimalism that Robert insisted on keeping so he could pretend he lived in a New York loft. Today, the walls of my living room are painted a screaming canary yellow. It's the kind of loud, aggressive color that physically forces you to be in a good mood the second you look at it. And my new furniture is all heavy, rustic wood. The kind of solid, dependable pieces that practically hug you when you sit down and make the whole room smell like beeswax and a real lived-in home. That first week alone was an adjustment, I'm not going to lie. The dead silence, which used to crush my chest like a concrete block, slowly morphed into a symphony. There are no more doors slamming in the hallway. There are no more grown adults screaming at me to iron their dress shirts at 7 a.m. There is no one standing in my kitchen complaining that the smell of my cooking is ruining their designer clothes. Now, my house smells exactly how I want it to smell, like fresh rosemary, bread baking in the oven, lemon floor wax, and above all else, absolute freedom. This morning, I woke up before the sun, not because my insomnia flared up, and not because my stomach was tied in knots, but because I had real work to do. I walked into my bathroom, my newly renovated sanctuary. I paid a plumber to rip out that old, capricious toilet that triggered this whole war, and I had him bolt down a brand new, modern, high-efficiency model. I stocked the racks with thick, turquoise Egyptian cotton towels and lit sandalwood aromatherapy candles on the vanity. Every single time I walk in there, I catch myself laughing out loud. "Useless old woman," I tell my reflection in the mirror as I wash my face with expensive oatmeal soap. "Just look at the absolute palace you built with your uselessness." While I was in the kitchen brewing my morning coffee, a dark roast boiled in a pot, with cinnamon sticks and brown sugar, exactly the way I like it, which they always mocked as low class, the intercom buzzed. It was old man Arthur from the moving company. He swings by my building every Tuesday now, but he isn't hauling furniture anymore. He comes to pick up the orders. "Good morning, Francis," his booming voice echoed as I opened the door. "God, it smells incredible in here." I've got 3 guys sitting in the truck downstairs practically drooling on the dashboard. "Come on in, Arthur, get out of the hall." The coolers are all packed and ready by the door. Because here is the truth. A woman who has busted her back working for 40 straight years doesn't just sit around watching daytime TV. After I drove a stake through the hearts of the vampires, which is how I affectionately refer to my daughter and son-in-law in my head, I got severely bored by week 2. So I went back to doing what I do best. I started cooking again. But this time, I am operating strictly on my own terms. No brick and mortar diner, no soul-crushing operating hours. I launched Francis's Box, a premium catering service delivering home-cooked lunches to corporate offices downtown. I cap it at exactly 50 meals a day, not a single plate more. It operates entirely on a monthly subscription model, and the wait list is 3 months long. Arthur hoisted the heavy insulated coolers filled with today's special, slow-roasted pork shoulder and red rice. "Hey, Francis," he muttered, suddenly dropping his voice and pulling his faded ball cap off his head before stepping back into the hall. "I actually saw your girl the other day, Lucy." I felt a sharp, violent pinch right behind my ribs, quick and nasty, like taking a drop of popping fry oil to the forearm. My hand froze dead on the kitchen counter. "Oh, really?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay breezy and casual. "How did she look?" "Well, she was working the floor at a shoe store downtown. One of those massive corporate chains where they make you wear the ugly polo shirts. She looked exhausted, Francis, real skinny." He hesitated for a second, rubbing the back of his neck. "But she looked awake. She didn't have that dead, beaten dog look in her eyes she always had when she was dragging that husband around." I nodded slowly, swallowing down a jagged cocktail of maternal heartbreak and fierce vindication. "I appreciate you letting me know, Arthur. Tell the boys to enjoy the pork." When the heavy door clicked shut, I walked over to the window and stared out at the street. I already knew Lucy was working retail. I knew everything. Because while I completely cut off their cash flow, I never cut off my intelligence network. The building's doorman, the guy who runs the corner bodega, even Mr. Garrison the lawyer, they all feed me updates, even when I don't ask for them. Robert and Lucy only lasted 2 weeks in that highway motel. After the cash dried up, they rented a suffocating, windowless room on the roof of a tenement building in a very rough neighborhood. The bank sent a repo man to drag Robert's luxury car out of a parking lot before the month was out. And according to the neighborhood gossip, their screaming matches were echoing 3 blocks down the street. It turns out, when actual starvation walks through the front door, Robert's unconditional love jumps right out the nearest window. I grabbed my purse and decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my head. I slipped on my brand new coat, a gorgeous, heavy red wool trench I bought using the exact cash I used to waste paying their internet bill and funding their lifestyle. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The entire neighborhood treats me differently now. I am no longer the quiet old lady who lives in her daughter's spare room. I am Frances, the boss. Mrs. Gable, the building's resident gossip, intercepted me by the lobby doors. "Frances, you look absolutely stunning. Listen, the girls in the building told me that pot roast you made last week was award-winning. When are you going to invite me up for a plate?" "The exact minute you learn how to mind your own damn business, Gertrude," I shot back with a wicked smirk. She threw her head back and cackled. I kept walking until I hit the open-air market. I still prefer to inspect my produce by hand. I was standing there, squeezing avocados to check their ripeness, when I heard a voice right behind my shoulder. A whiny, aggressive, deeply entitled voice that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention. "I'm telling you, man, this is completely beneath me. I have corporate experience. I used to be a regional project manager." I turned around very slowly, staying partially hidden behind a massive pyramid of navel oranges. It was Robert. He was standing at the butcher's counter, aggressively arguing with the owner, clearly begging for a job under the table or trying to hustle him. He looked absolutely destroyed. The slick executive suits were long gone. He was wearing a pair of frayed, stained jeans and a cheap polo shirt that stretched tight over his gut. His hair was long, stringy, and coated in grease. But the most shocking part was his posture. He was hunched over, defeated, crushed by the weight of the real world, yet somehow he still had that pathetic, stupid spark of unearned arrogance flashing in his eyes. The butcher, a massive guy who did not have the time or the pace for bullshit, waved a 10-inch cleaver at him dismissively. Listen to me, kid. People come into this shop to bust their asses, not to stand around giving orders. I look at your hands, and I see a guy who has never held a push broom in his entire life. Step aside and get out of my shop. You're scaring off my paying customers. Robert spun around on his heels, his face flushed a violent, humiliated purple, and he locked eyes with me. Our stares collided right there in the aisle, cutting through the heavy scent of chopped cilantro and raw beef. I braced myself. I fully expected him to lose his mind. I expected him to cross the aisle, cause a massive public scene, and scream in my face that I was a useless old hag. He didn't. He opened his mouth, snapped it shut, and immediately dropped his gaze to the floor. He looked at my polished leather boots. He looked at my expensive red wool coat. He looked at the heavy canvas bag on my shoulder, packed with premium cuts of meat. And then he looked down at his own scuffed, filthy sneakers. The sheer, crushing weight of the shame radiating off his body was so thick I could practically reach out and touch it. He spun on his heel, tucked his chin into his chest, and speed walked away, disappearing into the crowded market, sprinting away from the exact same woman he once thought he could step on. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. I felt balance. Sometimes the universe just needs a violent shove to snap things back into their proper alignment. I walked back to the condo with a remarkably calm heart. I cooked myself a bowl of chicken noodle soup, simple, hot, and deeply comforting. I sat down at my solid oak dining table, the one I rescued from the purge, which was now covered by a beautiful hand-embroidered tablecloth. When I finished my bowl, I noticed a white envelope had been slid underneath my front door. It didn't have a postage stamp. It just had the word Mom written across the front in Lucy's loopy, unmistakable handwriting. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a heavy glass of red wine, and brought the envelope back to the table. My hands weren't shaking, not anymore. I tore the flap open. Inside were 3 crisp $50 bills and a piece of lined notebook paper that had been violently ripped from a spiral binder. Mom, I know this doesn't even come close to covering a fraction of what I owe you. I know $150 is an absolute joke compared to the $100,000 we bled out of you, but it is literally every cent I have left from my paycheck after I covered rent for the room and bought groceries. Robert is gone. Actually, to be honest, I kicked him out 3 days ago. When we lost everything, I finally realized the truth. He wasn't enraged because he lost you. He was enraged because he lost access to your wallet. He screamed at me, he got in my face, and told me I was just as useless as you are. And in that exact second, Mom, I heard your voice echoing in my head. I heard you standing in that lawyer's office, telling me that dignity doesn't have a price tag. I told him to pack his garbage and get out. I told him that if I was so useless, he didn't need my minimum wage retail salary to feed himself. He packed a bag and crawled back to his mother's house in the suburbs. I stayed here. I am working the floor at the shoe store. My feet are in absolute agony every single night. I come back to this room feeling dead on my feet, and my hands are covered in calluses from hauling cardboard boxes around the stockroom. But Mom, it is my money. Nobody handed it to me. And for the first time in my entire life, when I walk into the bodega and buy a loaf of bread, it tastes like absolute heaven because I paid for it with my own sweat. I am not asking you to forgive me yet. I know I don't deserve it. I was a coward, and I was a terrible daughter. But I swear to God, you are going to get an envelope exactly like this one every single month, even if it takes me 100 years to pay off my debt. Thank you for slamming that door in my face. It was the only thing on earth that could have ever forced my eyes open. Love, Lucy. I set the letter down on the oak table. A single, solitary tear broke free and rolled down my cheek. But it wasn't a tear of grief. It was a tear of profound relief. It was the tear of a master gardener who took shears to a rotting, diseased branch and finally sees a strong, bright green stem fighting its way through the soil. Lucy had finally cut Robert loose. That right there was the actual victory. It wasn't the cash in the bank, and it wasn't the furniture. My daughter had violently amputated the parasite attached to her spine because I taught her in the most brutal way imaginable, that a woman does not need to carry the dead weight of a man who is actively drowning her. I picked up the three $50 bills. I could have deposited them into my checking account. I could have dropped them in a charity bin, but I decided to do something vastly more productive. I walked into my bedroom, spun the dial on my heavy steel floor safe, and slipped the cash into a fresh manila envelope. On the front, in thick black marker, I wrote, "Seed money for Lucy's future business." I wasn't going to tell her about it. Not yet. I am going to let her keep clocking in. Let her keep sweating on the sales floor. Let her keep learning the brutal, beautiful value of a hard-earned dollar. But one day, when she is finally ready, when the skin on her hands is as weathered, calloused, and wise as mine, I am going to hand her back every single cent she ever mailed me, multiplied by 10, so she can lay the bricks of her very own empire. The evening sun dipped below the city skyline, flooding my yellow living room with a heavy, burnt orange light. I sank into my favorite armchair and kicked my feet up onto the ottoman. My cell phone vibrated against the side table. It was a ping from the building's HOA group chat. "Francis, is the rumor true? Are you officially catering the building's holiday party this year? Because everyone on the fourth floor is saying if you aren't cooking, they aren't showing up." I smiled to myself, pulling up the keyboard. "You bet your ass I am, but we aren't eating dry, tasteless turkey. I am roasting a massive pork shoulder, and everyone brings their own bottles of wine because I am not running a charity operation." I hit send and locked the screen. I looked around the room. This was my kingdom. A kingdom built with decades of back-breaking labor, defended with teeth and claws, and reclaimed with cold, calculated intelligence. I thought about the word useless. What a deeply fascinating word. Useless is the man who cannot survive without sucking the blood out of the people around him. Useless is the man who screams at the top of his lungs because he doesn't have the intellect to form an argument. Useless is the man who looks at old age and sees a terminal disease rather than a master's degree in survival. I am Francis. I am 68 years old. I have varicose veins that ache when it rains and a lower back that screams at me every morning, but I am anything but useless. I am the matriarch who saved her entire family by methodically burning it to the ground first. I am the CEO who completely reinvented her life the exact second the world tried to force her into retirement. I am the woman who learned through fire and brimstone that true self-love smells exactly like a scrubbed floor, a balanced ledger, and a fresh pot of black coffee. I pushed myself up out of the armchair and walked into the kitchen to start prepping the pie dough for tomorrow's massive catering order. My hands, covered in age spots and mapped with protruding blue veins, sank deep into the soft, warm dough. I felt the heavy, elastic texture. I felt the pulse of life. I felt the undeniable power of creating something spectacular out of absolutely nothing. "The whole house stinks," I whispered into the quiet kitchen, the ghost of his 3 a.m. screaming fit echoing in my memory. I took a deep, lung-expanding breath. It smelled like vanilla extract. It smelled like toasted flour. It smelled like absolute, undeniable triumph. "No, Robert," I said to the empty room, driving my knuckles hard into the dough and kneading it with brutal force. "The house doesn't stink. For the first time in years, the house finally smells like me." And as the last sliver of the sun disappeared behind the concrete horizon, I covered the dough with a damp towel and let it rest. I knew that tomorrow morning, exactly like me, it would rise, ready to feed the world. Because old women like us, we don't expire, we don't go bad, we cure, we season, and when the smoke clears, we are the secret ingredient that makes the whole damn thing worth surviving. Educational statement and reflection. The story we just explored is entirely a work of fiction and is shared strictly for educational purposes, designed to inspire deep personal reflection and positive life changes for our listeners. When we listen to this captivating narrative, we witness a powerful lesson about self-worth and the absolute dangers of financial enabling. Frances, a 68-year-old woman who built her life through decades of hard work at her diner, found herself treated as a repulsive burden in the very condo she legally owned. Her bold decision to cut off the utilities, remove her furniture, and freeze the bank accounts was not an act of malice, but a vital boundary needed to stop her son-in-law and daughter from draining her life savings, a financial bleed that had already cost her over $100,000 in just 2 years. We can apply this enduring wisdom to our own daily lives by remembering that love should never require us to endure disrespect or exploitation. True care sometimes means allowing people to face the harsh, unvarnished reality of the real world so they can finally learn to stand on their own 2 feet. By fiercely protecting our dignity and our personal resources, we teach others the true value of hard work, accountability, and genuine independence. Personalized commentary. From my perspective, this profound narrative serves as a vital reminder that our dignity does not diminish with age. It is deeply heartbreaking to hear how Frances was called a useless old woman by a son-in-law whose entire lavish lifestyle she was secretly funding. However, her subsequent actions beautifully illustrate that true empowerment comes from recognizing our own intrinsic value. I believe that enabling toxic behavior, even out of deep maternal love, ultimately harms the very people we are trying to protect. When Frances legally evicted Robert and Lucy and cut off their credit cards, she administered a harsh but necessary dose of reality. We often confuse endless financial support with genuine love, forgetting that human resilience is only built through personal struggle. It is incredibly inspiring to see how removing the financial safety net forced Lucy to finally recognize Robert's abusive, parasitic nature and permanently leave him. Lucy's decision to work painfully on her feet in retail and pay back her mother with her hard-earned cash demonstrates the restorative, beautiful power of personal accountability. As listeners, we must constantly evaluate the emotional and financial boundaries we set with our own family members. We must never allow the fear of loneliness or conflict to trap us in an environment where our sacrifices are treated with disrespect. Frances's choice to secretly save Lucy's partial payments as future seed money is a brilliant testament to the enduring, strategic nature of a mother's love. This teaches us that tough love is rarely about petty revenge. Rather, it is about cultivating real independence and self-respect in the next generation. Furthermore, her massive success in launching a new corporate catering business proves that it is never too late to reinvent oneself. We can all learn to embrace our age and our past experiences not as liabilities, but as our greatest, most powerful assets. Ultimately, the greatest act of self-care is having the courage to reclaim our own kingdom and boldly paint our lives in the bright, joyful colors we truly deserve. The insights, lessons, and reflections provided in this commentary are intended strictly for general, educational, artistic, and informational purposes. They do not constitute professional, psychological, financial, or legal advice. Listeners should apply these humanistic lessons at their own personal discretion and are always encouraged to consult with qualified professionals regarding their specific family dynamics, financial planning, or mental health situations.